So, welcome everybody. So happy to have you here on this, what is undoubtedly a busy Thursday for everybody this time of year. It's just kind of how it is, right? So, thank you so much for being here, for taking some time out of your day. I'm Emily Torty. I'm an agroforester at Appalachian Sustainable Development. Steve Gabriel is also here today, being a guest host. So, you'll hear more from him in a minute. And we've got two guests that he will also introduce as a part of the presentation today. So I'm going to do a really quick intro because we've got just a really rich conversation that we're looking forward to getting into. So it'll be really brief, and then I'm going to hand it over to Steve. But first of all, I just want to say that one of the main financial supporters of this programming is the Edwards Mother Earth Foundation. And we are just super grateful for their support. They have been a really excellent funder that has given us a lot of autonomy to do this kind of work, which is especially important right now in the funding climate we're in. So we're just really grateful for the EMEF folks. This spring, we've got two guest hosts. We've got Steve Gabriel, who will be here today, Jonathan McCrae, who will be here next Wednesday with us. And we have had figured out this partnership with the Farming with Trees Collective, and you're going to hear more about that from Steve. But I just want to say thanks to those folks who have been supportive of this work, and it's really exciting to come together and to be able to sort of uplift some of the findings from the work that they're doing. So we're in welcome mode right now. I'm just going to talk a little bit about webinar functionality, and then we're going to get into the meat of it. So, friendly reminder, we are recording this webinar and it will be uploaded to YouTube. If you need closed captioning, which can be really useful, even if you're just in a like a loud space, or you need to be quieter about the way you're listening, or someone is speaking quietly or has an accent you don't understand, check out the closed captioning. It's a really, really useful tool. This is like the biggest thing that to remember is that there's the chat function and there's the Q&A function in the Zoom webinars. And so the chat is really where we want you to be just chatting. Like, it would be great if y'all want to enter your name into the chat now and say what you do and where you're located. That's what that's kind of for, is more like social stuff, sharing links for everybody. I'll be dropping a lot of links into the chat today. But if you want to actually ask a question of the presenters, please go to the Q&A function. So chat, casual, actual like functioning, like I want to make sure we talk about this, enter those into the Q&A. You can also keep an eye on the Q&A and see what other people are asking. You can like put a little thumbs up and upvote it. You can add your own answer to what's happening, to what other people have asked. So you can like also be a part of the answering conversation. So that's kind of a fun feature. But definitely, please check out the Q&A. And if you're also like really bashful about answering or asking questions in these spaces, there's an anonymous feature too. So if you're worried that you're about your question or something, you can ask it anonymously. So Appalachian Sustainable Development, where I work, our mission is to build a thriving regional food and ag system that creates healthy communities, respects the planet, and cultivates profitable opportunities for Appalachians. So if you've been on one of these webinars, you've seen this spiel before. I shortened it a lot for today and for next week, just so that we can really have lots of space for all the guest panelists. But just the nuts and bolts briefly is that we have 5 categories of work we do. Workforce development, we have different tracks that folks can go through our workforce development programming that helps folks with barriers to employment, with job training and job placement in agricultural spaces. So that could be anything from, we have an agroforestry nursery program that's launching this year. And we also have like a food truck track, or we do CDL driver trainings, that kind of stuff. We do a lot of agriculture education. We have veterans programming under the Ag Ed umbrella. We have like farm to school stuff. We have hospital, or at least one hospital garden where we have like lots of raised beds and are growing food and helping folks kind of connect in that way. Food access programming. We have a big food box program at our food hub in Duffield, Virginia, where we ship food up and down 81. And we also provide free food boxes weekly to lots of folks. And then we're also working on economic development, We have a winter business intensive. We have different trainings to help folks enter the market, and also resources management, which is where agroforestry falls. If you would like to learn more about what we do, please visit the website. It's a great resource. The agroforestry portion of the website is a really rich resource. And if there's any specific practice or anything like that that you're just trying to like learn more about, I guarantee we have at least a springboard to help you find some information about that. So thanks for tuning in this spring. We've got one more session to go. As I mentioned, we're in the Farming with Trees collaborative sessions right now. So we'll be hearing reflections and findings from the listening sessions they did. Today is the farmer focus. Next week is the nurseries focus. And so we hope we'll see you back for that session. First, I do need to launch a poll. Got to get back to my Zoom window. Actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to let Steve get his screen going. And then I will launch a poll while he's doing that so we can stack functions. But this just is for our grant reporting about what kind of folks are attending. So it's actually really valuable to us if you answer this. And Steve, you can go whenever you are ready, and I'll just let folks answer this in the background for a few minutes.
Right. Hi, everybody. There's no wrong answers, so do fill out that poll.
That's right. Thank you, Steve.
Got to make our funders happy, keep them happy.
Mhm.
Great. I'm really grateful to be here and grateful for your all's time to join us and have some reflection on the process we've been working on and have some dialogue with some lovely folks who participated. So yeah, I, I guess I want to start out and just encourage people to take a minute, let your brain just sort of rest. I don't know about you all, but like I definitely ran in from the farm doing things. There's probably things in the back of my mind that I'm thinking I should be doing, but I want to be here. And so I just want to encourage wherever you're at and whatever you're doing to just give yourself a little bit of that space. You may be actually doing things while often I listen to these while I'm, doing something on the farm, which is lovely. So that's fine. But just to be present with what you're hearing through your earpiece or whatever, and just to digest and reflect, because the real purpose of the work that we're trying to do is to create some of that space. And I found it just particularly like really lovely and rewarding to be in that space as well as like facilitate some of it. So just give a minute to like rub your face and chill out and take a breath and maybe fill out a poll if needed. But this is a lovely picture of one of my favorite places in the world. It's Lake Louie in the Adirondacks that hopefully gives some of that peace and calm that we could all use a little more of in our life. So yeah, we this is kind of the second of three webinars. We were honored to host Sophia Hampton and some of her research and some dialogue around multi-generational land stewardship. We'll be sharing that recording out on the ASD YouTube channel, and we'll post it on our website as well. So I encourage you to check that out if you weren't with us. But really, the theme of all three of these is efforts to sit with farmers and have conversations and listen and then reflect that info back out to the larger community. So farming with trees was really just a nice URL. It's very memorable, very easy to point people to. It's also a group of sort of it's a very loose network of folks who work on different projects around agroforestry at this point. And so it is a lot of things and it's nothing all at the same time. But it's a collective, it's a network, it's a connective piece. We're going to focus on one aspect of project work. The first project that we launched under this name was a series of silvopasture videos that we partnered with Regenerative Design Group and Costa Boutsakaris, who's a lovely filmmaker. And those are on the website as well if you go under projects and look at Northeast Silvopasture. Just a really nice snapshot and some lovely eye candy and some good learning in there. So that was just like a collective effort that didn't have a like logical home because it was shared. It wasn't something that one entity really owned. And so very similarly, this is a collaborative project. We're looking to bring people together around these conversations with trees and build some capacity around tree planting in different communities. And not pretend like we actually know what that looks like, but try try to discover what that looks like along the way. So um, the premise of this was is a grant. I'll acknowledge the funders and and some of the folks participating, all the kind of network that we've connected with through this process. But the impetus was really thinking about how there's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement around tree planting. We haven't seen any lack of that, but certainly historically, especially globally, as we look at like humans planting trees, we haven't done such a great job of like successfully planting trees or really planting forests or ecosystems. Most of those have not gone the way people hoped. And so there was a question of like, well, how do we not repeat those mistakes? What does it look like to have larger tree planting efforts that succeed? And there's some good research. We've linked to some articles and things on the website if you want to dig deeper in the resources page. But one paper in particular was really nice because it was a review just thinking about this. And really what it came down to was that tree planting efforts need to be grounded in communities and need to be grounded in a participatory process. And most of these processes fail when it's more of a top-down process where the folks on the ground aren't basically involved until maybe there's a little bit of cash flow, into a project and maybe some trees show up. And so the question was then, well, what does it look like to have a more participatory process? And it's a question we're still answering, but we've kind of like hopefully checked off the first box of that, and I'll show you kind of our thinking and how we're laying that out. But this idea of tree planting as a one-time effort, I think, is a really important thing to bring out. Initially, we're thinking really in this project and moving forward about capacity building for tree planting, because my experience, having been on a piece of land for about 15 years and planting trees, is there's never just one time that we did it. We have to constantly do it. The trees constantly die, or something happens, or we change our minds, or we realize a mistake. And so we're just constantly like bringing trees into the landscape. And now we're actually in a position where we also have to like thin trees and cut them down and move brush around. And like, we're not just establishing, we're actually having to maintain. So what does that look like? It really takes a village to do that kind of work. And the other piece was not to think we knew what to do, but to ask farmers, ask land stewards what they were thinking about with trees, what their connections to trees were. And so it's been remarkably slow work, but really rewarding work. So we spent really the first like year and a half of this grant project in conversation, listening to folks, reflecting on that process, documenting it, doing a whole bunch to really understand what those words meant when they came out of folks' mouths. So that's I didn't appreciate how slow that would be, but also how rewarding it is and how important it is. And I think this is a great time just culturally to take a minute to where we can slow down and listen to each other. I think that's going to be more and more critical as we move forward. And so obviously I already mentioned, like we want to have participation from farmers and land stewards, however they identify as working with landscapes at all phases of this process, not something that just kind of showed up and be like, hey, if you want this money, you can apply. Really thinking of something that involves them from the whole inception to the final implementation. And then really, I think one thing that's emerged is thinking about how funding is a resource in and of itself, and it can flow in different patterns in different directions. It can flow directly from large institutions to individuals, or it could flow through other economies and amplify its benefit. So what does it look like to have funding flow through nurseries, for instance, and make those nurseries connected to farms? Versus farms just sort of getting a pile of money and then trying to find random trees out there in the world. So that's still a big question we have, but something that has really come out of the conversations that we've had. And I think you'll hear more about the nursery piece with Jonathan and the guest folks next week. So on the website, there's a bunch of resources. Jonathan McCrae is the main collaborator on this project. We have lots of other folks tuning in, but in terms of like the day to day. We both kind of wrote articles trying to depict and think through some of these things, and this was kind of at the beginning of the project, so they're both posted on the website. But there's some other great resources and research to check in. So our thanks, our connections in this. There's many untold folks, and we're not explicitly naming all the participants because one of the agreements was to keep folks sort of anonymous, and just let them speak their thoughts. Not that I think there's anything that folks spoke of that they wouldn't happily share publicly, but we appreciate all the folks who participated, who showed up to these listening sessions and were just present and shared shared what they were thinking. We had a lovely group of co-facilitators that popped into a few of the sessions. And so Rafter Ferguson, Ruth Tyson, Jay Smith, Jeff Peastrack were all there. As well as Bliss, I'm realizing, because Catskill Grain Alliance, which we'll talk about, was self-facilitated, which is really cool. So we had like different versions of how sessions were working throughout this process. We've partnered with Meg Giroux and Interlace Commons through the process here. We'll hear from Courtney and Tianna, so we'll hear more about their farms and their projects, but also these larger communities they're part of that are interested in trees. So appreciate their willingness to kind of act as a hub, a bit of a point of contact to a larger group of busy folks. Ben Crockett and Berkshire Ag Ventures hosted a session and did a great job of helping take notes and keep that going. Kristen Nunez is here locally in Central New York with Cuba International. We did a session at a conference they hosted. We also did a session at NOFA New York. Yeah, and all the participants. So this is all supported through Northeast SARE. This is a SARE funded project. We're in year 2 of we'll be close to 4 years by the time we end the project. So we appreciate their guidance and support and ability to keep the funds flowing really at this point. So grateful for that. And what this is looking like, again, we kind of stepped into a proposal for a grant and then let things shift and emerge and weave and move as they needed to. But the goal from the beginning was to convene farmer listening sessions. Again, didn't quite know what those look like or how we were going to do them, but that was an important component. We've also had we just had the Catskill Grain Alliance. We'll talk a little bit about more of a community conversation, kind of a follow-up that we had. Those could look very similar, and they did in some ways, and they didn't in other ways. So just convening folks to have conversation is really that first block. And then the second piece we're moving into now more is working with individual folks to look at their landscapes and what their goals are and what their needs are from a tree perspective, and how to bring those two together through, I wouldn't call it a full design process, but something where we're looking to get a sense of the patterns and tree species and things like that make sense. And then the third phase will be where we're working with in partnership with nurseries, local nurseries within these networks, as well as more regional folks to bring these plant materials together, and do some skill sharing at different farms where we're making sure folks are comfortable and confident with tree planting and actually getting the trees in the ground. So that's where we're headed in the next couple seasons here. And another outcome of this grant has been the desire to continue to do this work and hopefully facilitate these kind of conversations with a community of farmers in a given place, in a given time that wants to put effort into trees. And so we have a nonprofit that we've actually formed called Mycena Agroforestry Initiative, which we have a website that I'll put in. It's just I'll put in the link, the chat once we get into Q&A. But that's really where we envision holding this longer term as a process and how other things can spur off of that. Because frankly, I've been running this grant through my farm LLC, which I highly don't recommend for folks out there who might have a farm business to try to run a grant through it. A large grant that's really more of a nonprofit kind of activity. It's been administratively not my favorite jam, but willing to make it happen. So these things can convene. So that's kind of some background. When we look at the actual sessions themselves, I think the reflection Jonathan and I, and as I debriefed with all the co-facilitators, what was really clear is like we didn't actually know how to do these, and so we really were just like showing up in these different spaces, convening folks, and then seeing what played out, and then learning from that and applying it to the next one. And it took a lot of steps, as I mentioned. It's a very slow process, but a really important process to engage with. So a lot of conversations, just organizing communications with folks hosting these events or these groups, really thinking about the ways we're going to facilitate them, recording these and getting transcriptions of those recordings, and then highlighting key points in those, and then synthesizing them, and sort of really, I think I've listened to all the listening sessions a good half dozen times at this point. And it's really lovely to be a fly on the wall and hear what folks are thinking about and talking about. Because what I found is that each group brought a different perspective, a different set of values and goals, and just their own life experience, and really talked from a real heartfelt place, which was really remarkable to see. So there's something about this topic that really draws that out of folks, and and that was really evident across all these. So what I'm going to do is share some of these broad patterns. This will be shared out again. Uh, Probably sometime in June is our goal as a written document. If you want to dig into the details, it's really tricky and it feels honestly, like a big responsibility to take everyone's heartfelt thoughts and feelings and then like smash everybody together and sort of summarize. But there were some really interesting patterns that emerged, I think are really important, and that we want to bring forth to you folks and folks in the field to be thinking about. I'm curious, as feedback to hear what of these are surprising or what of these, just confirm something. And I think even if something is, oh yeah, I thought that's what it was, I think that's really important that we confirmed it by hearing it from the farmers' voices versus, my experience in the past as like a technical service provider or working for extension was often we just assumed this is what people wanted. So it was validating in some ways to hear things we thought were true, be referenced and be sort of reiterated, time and time again. So one of the first set of questions we asked was really like, where are you coming from? What are stories of trees and forests from your childhood? What does that look like? And those personal stories really broke open the conversation in a really remarkable way, a very surprising way. Maybe not surprising if I think about it, but I didn't expect it to have this effect of like really launching the conversation where I don't think myself or other facilitators, if I can speak for them, like felt like they had to like push the conversation to come out. It really started from a lovely place. So what we're trying to get at is like, what is in your mind about trees and where's that really coming from? And so these kind of like larger buckets, really the personal stories, the relationships of growing up with trees and what that looked like was really informative. If you were in an urban or a rural context, was very distinctive in terms of the ways like folks brought that up constantly about that context and how it really shaped. And I think in conversations where there was a little bit of crossover between urban and rural, people could really see the differences in where they were coming from, how they thought about trees. Of course, race and culture, we had a pretty diverse group of folks in different conversations, really showed up in the ways people told stories of their upbringing, of course, told stories of where they lived. And then finances and markets. So, as a farmer, as a land steward, the pressures of the capitalist system, whether we like it or not, the um, the wanting to do tree stuff but not knowing where to fit it in, the feeling of scarcity of time, like all those kind of things fit under that bucket. And also the idea of like, can these trees produce something that I can sell? Is it a marketable product? How does it fit in as I'm thinking about farming as an entrepreneurship thing or as a livelihood, right? How does that fit in? Those themes really showed up time and time again. But I think like the biggest thing that was clear and across like there were a lot of those kind of pieces that showed up, but this was like very universal. And this is actually from the report, and I really wanted to share the words, so I'm just going to read this. When speaking about current relationships with trees, many participants had profound respect and almost spiritual view towards them. They spoke of trees as time capsules, treating trees like their children, as a metaphor and analog for a fundamental existential relationship I have. This perception was the driving force for many individuals' current stewardship of trees. Once one plants a tree of a perennial lifelong relationship, it anchors you to a piece of land. It encourages you to watch the changes that occur in the environment as a result. Many spoke of their relationships with trees as reciprocal. They provide for us and we provide for them. Others were just beginning their relationships, and their perceptions will change and morph as they continue to work alongside trees. And what we heard was like a real enthusiasm for that type of relationship and that type of experience, um, especially in comparison to a lot of the farming we find ourselves doing, which is a daily grind of often shorter term and sort of like more annual cycles. Even on our farm, we do work with trees, but mostly we're growing mushrooms as our main crop. And that's like a very cyclical annual kind of cycle that doesn't have the same longevity, doesn't have the same piece. And I want to appreciate Annika Roland, who helped synthesize some of the interviews and also wrote these words. That was a nice synthesis, I think, that really captures what I heard in the sessions I was in and as I listened to the recordings. So how do those pieces translate into like a little more like practicality around perceptions? Like where do trees fit into the farm landscape? There's a lot of agreement, and we'll sort out a little bit of this in the larger dialogue with our guests. But like these things came up time and time again. And what was really interesting is that when we talked about like how do trees benefit your farm, like what are their roles and how do you see them positively contributing? People may have said different things, but what was really clear across all the conversations was they had a really expansive and deep understanding of how these benefits, excuse me, that these benefits were present and that they were multifaceted. There wasn't any like, well, I don't know, this may or may not fit. It was really there's a real enthusiasm for the benefits that these trees could bring, and there's various ways that can show up. So shading for animals, folks in urban spaces talked about shade for people, shade for cities. Even in rural spaces, people talked about shade for people in hot sunny fields, whether it's a veg operation or a livestock operation. Wind protection, wildlife and pollination, fruits, nuts, medicinals, climate mitigation, soil health. And a lot of folks also really talked about the sort of mental health, well-being aspects of having trees in the landscape and wanted to make sure that was, on the list at the end. And then there was this other piece to that, which again goes back to this larger connective tissue that was really lovely to see and hear time and time again. But what was really reinforcing was that our premise was that, we can't do this alone. This is not a process that works if we keep ourselves isolated on our own little farm projects. We really need to do this in community. And so almost every group reiterated that in different ways and with different lenses on, but certainly like community is needed. If we're going to plant, care, and harvest from these trees, we have to build networks, we have to build connectivity and have that as part of the fabric. So nothing surprising to me, but really nice to see as something that showed up again and again. And then the other side of it is like we talked a lot about mistakes when planting trees if you've planted them, or barriers or things that you see as challenges to bringing trees into the farm landscape. And so these three areas were some of the main ones. Learning and access to information also included some discussion around like support, like technical service providers or people that could help with planning, or even people that could do the tree planting work. There's not a lot of outfits that will go ahead and put the trees on the farm, which people spoke of a desire for. But in terms of learning access, there was an element of knowing how trees could be beneficial, of knowing of maybe a few species of interest, but having a lot of questions, wanting more hands-on learning experiences, and wanting to engage more with folks who had that experience and develop skills. So I sensed and it came out in the recordings just like a desire to, but a little bit of lack of confidence of how to, and wanting that support. And that might come from within the community, but it might also be something that needs to draw on a larger network than, a 1 hour drive to get folks skilled up in that. Um, Funding was, of course, not surprising. And of course, we're in a very volatile, we'll say, and sort of challenging time. I think I'm sure a lot of folks in this call have been impacted or know many folks who've been impacted by the recent decisions of the current administration to cut funding that was really some of the largest commitments to tree planting that we'd ever seen. And I think what was interesting to hear specifically from one group of farmers was this idea that, and this was before these times and when some funding was on the table still, but even prior to that, we still look at sources of state, federal, and private funding. And there was this interesting comment about how much burden there is on the farmer to find these opportunities and like then convince people they should fund. And knowing that the larger public also sees the benefits of trees, the question was, well, why isn't there a way where funders are recognizing the value and just providing opportunities more for farmers? So there was a real frustration expressed in that. There was different groups had different awarenesses about potential opportunities. No one felt like it was an easy part of the process. I'm sure that's not surprising to folks participating, but and it was mentioned again, even if we had the funds available, are we ready for it? And that was certainly a big question with this huge wave of stuff coming in, is like, were farmers really ready to plant the trees and commit to large, planting projects? And so that those two really go hand in hand, I think, and that's something we're thinking about a lot. And then finally, not surprisingly, comes up a lot in agroforestry conversations is this big piece of connection to landscape and secure tenure to that landscape, which is certainly historically a very deep dive into some of the ways that land is viewed and owned and sold and bought in this country, the ways that certain people have more access and more privilege towards those resources. And that came up in every single conversation in different ways as an important factor. And so I think it's very easy to say at its most basic level, we can't move any of these conversations or any of this work forward without really digging into that and looking what that looks like in specific contexts and how we can build a foundation of that even before trees go in. So there are folks that were enthusiastic, interested, but said, "There's no point in me even thinking about planting trees if I don't have that connection to the landscape or that knowing that I'll be there." And so that's really the starting point. And there's work we're doing locally on that. There's work these groups we'll talk about are doing. So we'll bring that into the conversation a bit here. All right, and then finally, just to like wrap up these this distillation of all these lovely conversations and all these thoughts, some things that we noticed as facilitators. I've already mentioned some of these, like starting with relationships and childhood memories was a very potent way to get dialogue started. So I just encourage you, if you're convening folks, to talk about really anything farming related, I'd say. It was something I realized was true across the farming community, but like if we don't speak to a bit of what we care about and what we love in all this, we might not get anywhere. So if we take a minute to really remember that, I think that can be a really powerful way to start a lot of conversation. But specifically here, definitely something that was very clearly needed and people responded well to. I mentioned the sessions were all very different, so we can't assume that a listening session should look the same. So there were self-facilitated ones. Catskill did their own, and we'll talk a little bit about that versus ones that like myself or others facilitated, or that I partnered with somebody who had a deeper connection to that group as a co-facilitator, right? And it really just depended on the situation, what made sense. We did some at conferences, which was more like a conference session. Those were probably actually some of the most challenging because of the expectations and the way conferences are. Like the NOFA New York conference was great, room full of enthusiastic people, but also like a room full of 80 enthusiastic people, which is really hard to have a a conversation that we could feel connected and feel like there was space for everybody, right? So we did find that like smaller groups were actually the most potent spaces to have these conversations, and often in these funded projects we want to like project larger numbers of people that gathered and did it, but like we had some Zoom calls that were just like three people, and they were some of the most powerful, and it was really because those folks were able to just have this different type of dialogue than of course a group of 10 or 12 can. Um, I think we've mentioned that like the, sense of longevity and taking action for future generations, and like that tree planting feels like it speaks to something of a more desirable long-term way to farm. Like that was really present, and not surprising that that sentiment was there, but that it was such a foundational part of people's thinking was really potent in the listening sessions. And then, as I said, like I think passion, curiosity, willingness, very high. A little trepidation, little uncertainty around like the confidence of actually getting these things in. Maybe from past experience, maybe from the frustrations of working with bureaucracies and funding mechanisms, maybe just not having a lot of experience, right? Having a lot of experience in different parts of farming, but not necessarily working specifically with trees. So where we're at now, what we want to transition to is this project again, sort of piloting a process. So next week, Jonathan will talk about conversations we had with individual nurseries. Most of them were also farms, but they had a strong nursery component. And so we also did a series of segments of sessions with them, which were more like interviews because it was mostly one-on-one or two folks with one of us. Um, those were also a valuable piece that we didn't intend to originally do, but it was really clear that the nursery question, the question of how we're going to grow and provide plant material for these farms around our landscapes, like that's a big gap and something that needs to be talked about. So we kind of took these two tracks and learned very different things, and I think it'll paint a really nice picture. But all that to say, we've wrapped up that piece of the project for now. And what we're moving into is working with rather than scattered farms about, what's really become clear is we need to find groups of farms that have some social connectivity already, have some connection, whether that's through co-marketing and co-facilitating, whether it's just geography, whether it's just because they like to hang out together, and work with those groups to then build some capacity around the tree planting. So that's where we're in now, is sort of that piece of design, of assessment, of kind of talking to folks about their individual situations, and that'll lend us to then the work of gathering the plant materials and bringing that to the spaces, getting stuff in the ground. So Right now, our grant has uh, uh, like a good, but not sufficient enough to like cover the cost, the true cost of trees. That's one of the things we're learning is like what does it look like? What is the cost of providing a tree to a farm? And so our grant funds, like right now, based on the goals of the trees we're trying to produce, like we have about like $6 a tree, which is a good starting point, but we're looking to make it more like the reality of like $10 to $12 a tree. And we're lucky that we have a foundation who's interested through the nonprofit to do a matching fundraising campaign. And so we will be putting that out as a way to match and work with these farms and show that this process can lend itself to a much more successful outcome in terms of tree planting. So that's my little plug, just to mention that that'll come down the pike, and I'm going to put in the chat as we transition to conversation with Courtney and Tianna. Just put a little link in the chat to offer you the opportunity to just sign up for our Farming with Trees email list, which will just be a place we can make sure we're notified when the recordings are up, when reports are out, and when there's opportunities to help fund the next stage of this. So if you're willing to put your name on that list, that's great, or share that information with others in your network that might be interested. We really appreciate that. Yeah, so that's the broad view. What I want to do is encourage questions at any time. Can use the question function for that. I'm gonna invite our sort of it's like I'm co-hosting and then I have co-hosts here or participants here. So I really appreciate that Courtney and Tiana have been up to join us today and have some conversation. I'll let them speak about their farms as well as the communities they're involved with, um, and that's what we're going to shift to next. So let me just move my screen around here. Tiana's first on the video, so I'm gonna toss it to you if you don't mind.
Can,
Can you give some context to your farm and the Agrarian Alliance and sort of the larger network that we've been gathering around trees? That would be a great way to start.
sure. Can you give me some time frame? Or is this like a 3 minute conversation? Uh,
Sure. Yeah. You have like the rest of the hour just to, explain what's going on over there. No. Yeah, like 2 minutes would be great just to kind of give the broad overview of where you're
Great.
coming from and who the people are. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. So I'm a farmer in the Catskills. I run a farm called StarUp Farm that we started in 2015. I've been farming here since 2010. Um, we're like 3.5 hours north of New York City and 2 hours west of Hudson around. So we're kind of like deep in ag land. And it's an area that after the consolidation and local dairy sort of declined, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure or resources for thriving farm economy here. And so when I showed up, randomly got a job at a farm, um, convinced them to do markets in the city because the wholesale was just, there was the margins were not like viable. Um, and and they were big enough and they were able to do that. It was like a 50-acre veg farm and they had some trucks. They'd been around for a decade. This farm is called Lucky Dog, farm in Hamden, New York. And but what we started to do was to invite our neighbors to jump on the trucks with us because we had this resource that other farms didn't. And so we created a little like farmer-driven food hub called the Lucky Dog Hub. When I started my own farm, the Lucky Dog, the next generation of farmers there didn't really want to take it on because there was no margin there or any value add to their operation. It was just a lot of extra work. So when I started my farm, we started a multi-farm CSA called the 607 CSA, that worked with a lot of those same farms and was a direct marketing tool for them, to find consumers for their products through this community supported agriculture model. It also like helped us start our farm and mitigated some of the risk at our new place because we didn't know what we were going to be able to do. Um, Sorry, this is a long story, but trying to do one more minute. And then in the pandemic, that blew up into this huge project because supply chains broke, and then we became the regional supply chain. So we now work with like 53 farms. There's an 800 member CSA, but we're a nonprofit now and we do mutual aid work, farm to school work, a bunch of other stuff. The point is, we're a very connected group of people, so we were a great target for this. But a lot of us are beginning farmers, poor people, people without land security, a lot of people renting in tenuous, situations. And so none of us really have any experience with perennial or tree crop, work. And so we're all excited about it and interested, and have a little bit of, like proximity to other people that know some stuff. But this was a really wonderful opportunity for us all to actually do the work and to talk about doing the work even in like in insecure land situations. So we're all at the very beginning of our journey, and we're just really excited to have these guys as resources and friends to help us. And luckily, one of the newest farms that came around is a little tree nursery, and they're, in Stanford. And so they're going to be a very important part of this project because they are local, knowledgeable people that we can work with. And so Steve and John are just helping facilitate this, the connectivity that is already here. So I think that that summarizes where we're at.
Yeah, awesome. And can you just speak to, did you name your farm and what you all grow?
My farm is StarUp Farm. The nonprofit's called Catskills Agrarian Alliance. We're just a veggie farm. We're a diversified veggie farm, but we did manage to get a spot. We'd been renting since 2015, and in 2021 we moved next door, and so we have this like degraded dairy property that is, surrounded by monoculture of corn. So we're really excited. We're growing diversified veg, but there's pesticides being wafting around us. So we're super excited about creating hedgerows and like buffer zones and like doing all of these in addition to like whatever coppicing and mulching and all the other great benefits of trees, but also just having a this little buffer is really a remediation area is going to be really great. And so anyway, that's where we're at right now. But lots of veggies going all everywhere. That's what we do. Just a small veggie. We're like about 10 acres, I think.
Yeah, and I think what was really clear in the conversation that you all had um, was this piece about like someone asked specifically like, oh, like how do trees fit in with veggies? Like, what's the relationship there? So I'm just curious if like we'll probably dig a little deeper, but just like what's the initial thought of that? Like how do trees work with veg?
Well, I think in all sorts of ways, there's like, one is just beneficial insects habitat. One is, like I said, like hedgerows and buffer zones. One is coppicing and using the organic matter as mulch. One is, there's just billions of ways, but also just diversifying our creating perennial and different sorts of food products. We're not like we just fell into veggie farming because it was a template that we knew, and so we're excited to just kind of continue to learn and grow as stewards of the land and people trying to feed other people. So I think we're really excited about creating the idea because we are surrounded by kind of the monoculture tree planting agroforestry monoliths that are venture capitalist driven near us, but those business models just don't make sense to me. And so like while I appreciate them continuing to keep land in production and they have great motives and they're wonderful, I think that this kind of scrappier approach of like trying to collaborate and create, lots of stewards of the land that can like take care of smaller groups of trees that can then aggregate products and have that be part of a marketing stream that already exists does make a lot of sense to me. So like some sort of future hazelnut or chestnut or production as an aggregated effort is like another way that it's works well with the veggies. So like we're always looking for shelf stable stuff and we don't have any winter products. We don't do any value add. So it's like really it'll be really fun to like see what opportunities there are with trees and berries and nuts.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks. Courtney, I'll have you share yourself, farm, and just a little bit about little nice community folks you got living around
Mhm.
you that we gathered last
Yeah.
winter?
I'm Courtney. I'm from Mace Chasm Farm. We're in the eastern Adirondacks, super rural. We're in Essex County. My farm's a livestock farm, and recently we've been around. Our livestock farm's been around under our stewardship for 12 years. Um, we have a butcher shop, so we do a value add here, and we direct market in the area. And a few years ago, we also added a small tree nursery. I'm growing for Fedco. This is my third year growing for Fedco trees in Maine, and then experimenting this spring with growing for the Intervale Conservation Nursery. But it's a very minor part of the business overall, and I would say that the livestock farm has carried my ability to be able to get into that new project. But it hopefully it will start to carry itself. The group of people that gathered here are all farmers from this county. We probably all farm within an hour of each other. We all know each other pretty well. They're all like first generation farms. Everybody's direct marketing, not collaborating a lot between farms, especially not formally like Tianna's crew is doing, which is so cool. But we're at the same marketplaces. The market up here is like pretty limited. It feels like an extremely seasonal. Um, so we see each other in those spaces a lot. And yeah, I don't know. Any we actually also, I mean, this group had gotten together one time in to talk about agroforestry. And then we heard about this USDA grant getting rolled out that maybe would support agroforestry. And we applied for it as a group through another nonprofit in the area. And we were funded, and it was a pretty big pot of money. So we were a group under another USDA grant, which is a grant that fell through recently. So that funding's gone. We had all gotten to the stage, I guess, that for the most part, we had all worked a little bit one-on-one with an agroforestry consultant on our farm. So we had started to think about to articulate what our goals are and learn a little bit about the species we could work with. And some of us had designs, but they were like sort of they were like projects 10 acres or smaller. The majority of our group is livestock farms, so the footprint of 10 acres is a little different. There's one veggie grower who is there who farms in a floodplain, but there's a lot of livestock based farming up here, partly because of the terrain. It's like not flat land. Yeah, so that's one. Our group had been a group in another context, and it was a really different experience than being a group in this discussion.
So I'll kind of ask you the same question because I know that was something I didn't think about till I was realizing we were gathering you both together and having this conversation. But I asked Tiana about the veg kind of side of things. I'm just curious, like your experience, and also that most of the folks, it was much more of a livestock oriented conversation, the listening session, and I noticed some differences. I'm just curious what, where you see trees fitting, and what are the intersections with livestock? What are some of the motivations that you and like other folks are thinking about with animals and trees?
Yeah, I think what I heard in that session from the other farmers and my experience was that it's mostly been, I feel like, brought to it through, like kind of climate resilience measures we can take on our landscapes. For me, primarily the motivating priority is shade for the livestock, not just for the livestock, honestly, also for the fodder, for the pasture itself. But I would say the priorities for the livestock farmers are like shade, water retention on pasture, maybe during dry periods, the extreme, just yeah, like relief from the extreme heat. We've had like much longer periods of extreme heat, and then yeah, like I think everybody mentioned biodiversity as a motivating factor. And actually, I mean, the fodder cropping is cool too. Just the diversity of the diet for coppicing and grazing fodder is also big for everybody, I think, in the group.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I feel like that's like round two because it's like just getting some trees and some shades like the first thing, and then like as we're experiencing oh, we got to manage these trees. Okay, maybe that's the opportunity for fodder. And now I wish when I
Yeah.
planted trees the first time I'd thought about that a little more. There's some strategies around like pruning and management, but yeah, that's awesome. So I'm curious to hear from each of you, and just encourage folks again if you have questions or anything you want to bring forth from the conversation, like please use the Q&A feature or put it in the chat. But I'll keep going. I got plenty here. I'm just curious, like, what your experience of the listening session was like, and if you learned anything you didn't know about your fellow farmers that were in the room.
Can I start? Is that
Yeah.
okay? I loved it. It was awesome. Bliss, who was farming with us and is now living in Asheville, if lives there and wants to look them up, was really initiated this and rounded us up and made us all do it. And we were all like reluctant participants. So we're like, okay, we'll do this. Um, and then it was just really we all worked together on the farm, obviously, all the time, and just it don't take time to even at our lunch breaks or whatever, we don't really ask each other personal questions, you know? It's just sort of like you're just in the moment or you're working. So it was like a really beautiful way to get to know each other in addition to like learning about our relationship with trees and it was just such a beautiful and fun experience. So I don't know. It was a very special moment, I think, for us. And the fact that it's like turned into a really cool or community organizing project is also really lovely. But I was also really appreciative of that approach to like start with a just with listening instead of telling. So I just want to say that we were really appreciative of that too. So yeah, it was I don't think I have yeah, I think those were my impressions.
Yeah, is there anything that sticks out that just you remember that was like, oh, I didn't know this about this person?
I mean everything. I mean it was like just every answer was really fun. I feel like it was just like a hour and a half long icebreaker or something. Like and we all know each other well, so but yeah, I think it's fun. It was like it was fun to just again like you were mentioning how urban and rural relationships to trees were different and how the varying levels of knowledge or intimacy I think were really interesting too or like you know or who was pragmatic and who was mythologizing and like, I don't know it was just like a really interesting conversation that kind of spanned all over the place. It got very practical and like real and also was like very nostalgic. So really fun.
Yeah, yeah. And there's like, I think it seemed like from folks there, but also the gathering we recently had, there's like a bit of an urban rural, like there was some overlap between folks that had grown up in rural areas and urban. So I don't know if there's anything that was noticeable there or that you think shapes how people are thinking about trees, but that was something that your group had in particular was a lot of like overlap.
No, I don't know. I think it's like just a continuing developing relationship with trees, you know? So I think people's perspectives are changing over time and that's it's fun. And there's just so much to learn, you know? So I think just everybody being open is really fun too. Nobody pretended to be an expert, which is always really nice, you know?
Awesome. Same question, Courtney. What was your experience like and anything that
Yeah, Tiana's characterization of like an hour and a half long icebreaker felt good. And it is interesting when you're doing that in a room of people you know. And a lot of and that stuff can be good to listen to, even though I think, and it's the beginning of a project, so it's appropriate. And I'm excited for the project to keep going and to deepen our gathering around this topic in particular, because I think a lot of the time we're brought together as farmers just for that part, if any. And I'm always like really excited to hear about like the deeper problem solving that everyone's facing, which this topic does touch on kind of right off the bat. But yeah, that was really fun. It was really contrasty with our experience being a group that was part of a USDA grant, we had never been brought together around that grant in a single time. Yeah, it's interesting. I think even though we were all in that project together, technically, and really there's a lot of ways that resource sharing makes sense in a project where you're all doing tree planting. We had never been sort of coalesced under that grants umbrella. Hadn't really discussed what everyone was hoping to do. And it was just a little confusing and isolating. So this was like a really nice contrast to that.
And then let's see, we're so also with Catskill folks, we just had we you all did that first conversation last summer, I believe, like in July, maybe the heat of the summer. Took a little break. And then we just convened a larger group or sort of a more disparate group that are connected, but from a lot of different because everyone that was in that first conversation was from StarUp, right? Yeah, yeah. So then we have this, what I think of as another listening session slash like more of a community conversation. And I'm just curious what your experience of that was like, Tianna, like in addition. And one of the things we were trying to do was make that next step, like Courtney's saying, like it's nice to get together and talk, but we're really trying to move towards sort of some actionable activities. And what we wanted to see was like what actual strategies, what actual plans can we start to put into place? And so for Jonathan and I, it was like we went up and met with the Forest Exchange, which is that new nursery. Rhiannon and Cameron are. I think Rhiannon's going to be she'll be in the webinar next week. I'm not sure if Cameron will be there, but they're going to speak a bit to the nursery side of things. But so we got to visit their space and talk to them about their plans, and then we convened this nice like group of folks coming from all over, and I believe like a lot of them weren't necessarily like formally in the alliance or in your sort of co-marketing CSA, but were connected. And so I was just curious, like it was a lovely space in Delhi. So I don't know if you can share a little bit just about like that evening and what that felt like.
Sure. Yeah, the space was called Bushel, and that was like a project that we also started in 2015 as sort of a community space. So it was fun to have it there. And that's where we also started the Catskills chapter of the National Young Farmer. So I had like farmer hang there for years, and especially in the winter. So it has been like a farmer convergent space anyway. But that has sort of like petered out in the past couple of years. So it was really nice to kind of re-engage the space in that way. And for me, it was fun because we do have our relationship with our farming collaborators is our partners is very transactional for the most part. You know, it's just like, here's the week's numbers, let's do the work, blah, blah, blah. So again, outside we all live pretty far away from one another out here. So it takes an effort to get together. So it was a great excuse to get everybody together. And yeah, and I think that that's why we chose Alliance in our name instead of a like official co-op or something, because we have relationships with a lot of people, whether or not they're transactional. And so it was really fun to be in community with people that we are, working on in various ways, whether it's advocacy or policy or, but other projects. Um, so yeah, it was just again a really great excuse to socialize with other farms. And I was really excited at how eager everybody was and how forward everybody. Often those people can be pretty shy, and this was not a shy space. Everybody was very happy to engage and very open, and so it was fun to meet some new people. It was fun to learn about everybody's relationship with trees, and everybody seemed very eager to like move this project forward in a real way. So that also it felt like very easy, and it made me feel like just like we were joking afterwards, like just like planting a tree, we probably should have started this 20 years ago, like because it was like very natural and very easy. So yeah, I think it has legs. So that it was a great experience.
Yeah. Yeah, the socialization was interesting because we were trying to like give space to that and not just try to cram in a whole bunch of programming because it was clear that people just wanted to get together and chat. And that's like some of the most important, like that's when I go to a farm conference, usually it's the hanging out and the chatting is like what I find value in. So trying to create that atmosphere a little bit too while we're, also bringing forth some of these pieces. And I don't, we weren't expecting that to be like, this is the outcome that everybody wants. Everyone has very different needs. But I do think, and especially in the context of when we look at the cost of trees, what we have right now, and the grant, that sort of thing. Like we really thought about how we can think of this as something to invest in some capacity that then can be replicated. And so I think an idea that came out throughout the day in our conversations with you all, but also then the nursery folks and in the larger conversation was like looking at planting smaller hedgerows and planting denser plantings that are like the source of future propagation material would seem to be like an exciting idea that people were into, and that it could be a place to continually revisit every year and collect material from, and it would be an excuse to get together. That was one of the reflections I had of leaving was like, oh, if you all have tree, like if we had all the resources in the world and you could all just get trees on your farm, you may not actually go visit each other. But if StarUp has the river locust like seed bed, then like a lot more people are gonna have to stop by if they want to get that seed. And so hopefully it like actually stimulates that excuse, right? Because we all need that excuse to get to other people's places. So I thought that was interesting, like how that showed up and people seemed like it matched up with what we can do and also like how we can facilitate more of that kind of energy because that's what seems to be really feeding people. Yeah.
No, your project to make this a community organizing tool is working, I guess is the upshot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Um, and let's see. Yeah, so that was good. We're still organizing next steps for the Essex County folks, but I don't know if there's been any follow-up or any other like any trickle down stuff that's happened in the background that I haven't heard about. I don't know if there's anything, Courtney.
I mean, there's a little dialogue among the participants about tree planting, like a little picking each other's brains that I see on our local farmer listserv or just among the group. But I don't know. I think like, no, I don't think we haven't carried it forward really on our own. I think this group having been part of this like years long like USDA thing that then just like evaporated. I don't know if there's like a little bit of like uncertainty or burnout. So I think it is a good group. It's coalesced, but I think the next steps will be good. I think it'll be like it'll affirm that we can carry on with that work, without the bigger funding.
Yeah, and maybe some element of having to start smaller might be okay. Might be a good
Yeah,
thing.
definitely. I mean, it's, planting trees. So the whole group is like inexperienced at agroforestry implementation. And it's like, it's intimidating to start. Um, yeah. And I think probably the most intimidating thing, the thing I think we were all sort of stumped on, but also that I think is so cool is that it's like the realization that we need to pause and do some serious design work on our farms. So yeah, I think yes, starting slowly feels good. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna echo the farm design part of it was like everybody. Yeah, we kind of work in these templated ways where it's like, oh, I'm a livestock farmer, I'm a vegetable farm, and this is what this looks like. And so it's really nice to have some consulting body, i.e., you guys, like come help us reimagine what is possible. So that that is a function of this that I think is everybody's really excited about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I
Yeah, I
think
think it would be a good tool on its own, I think, for all but new farm operations. I mean, I wish that was some like program offered to anyone closing on a farm or like starting a new farm business. But it's not, I guess it's not really been like part of the culture, but we're small ag in general, we're not inheriting a lot as we start these businesses today.
yeah. Um, I'm curious to ask both of you. So one of the reflections we've been having lately is that there's a lot of agroforestry concepts and ideas out there about putting systems into place, and that one of the challenges, of course, of an agroforestry system is like the time when that harvest starts to come in is usually a pretty long time frame. Like some of the crops, maybe 3 or 4 years, you're starting to think about that. Often it's a decade plus, right? And so that's like one approach to how this shows up. But what I found really interesting about both the groups that were assembled is like you all are on the grind every day. You're farming, you're producing lots of like amazing food, right? And you're feeding people, and they're in these systems that we certainly know much more about and know what they look like in terms of the steps that takes. And that's not just, going out and doing the chores. It's also the whole seasonal cycle of all the timing that needs to happen, whether that's, calving and lambing versus, starting seeds in the greenhouse and getting them into the ground. So there's that whole cycle that you have to get really good at and just sort of repeat every year to get moving, right? And so there's this interesting thing where we're looking at projects. We're also trying to like bring a tree layer into something that's like very much moving and very packed and very busy. I didn't get a sense there's like a lot of free time in here. So I'm curious, like, how do you think, and Courtney, you mentioned a little bit that it's like a teaser to that, is like, you feel like your livestock business has allowed you some space to do more with trees. And I'd love you to speak to that a little bit. But this idea of like, how do you see that fitting in so that it feels like a blessing and not a burden to bring that element in, right? Because you all are already on that treadmill on a daily basis.
Yeah, it feels really challenging to protect trees in our systems while they're becoming established. Um, and what was I going to say? The other part of it is, yeah, and then it's also really challenging just to acquire the practitioner knowledge while I'm running this business, because yeah, the grind is real. It's so different from when we're just even year one of a farm. Maybe I had a little bit more, our volume was smaller. Our volume's like pretty high now, and we are really like maxed out. So it is hard to take the learning time. So I tried to do that seasonally. The stack of books I meant to read about agroforestry this winter, I didn't get through it. But both of those things are true, that like while we're up and running, it's hard to learn and it's hard to ensure success in a new system. Um, the farm allowing me to get into it was the nursery side of it, but it's true kind of for the just implementation of agroforestry around the farm as well, because basically our livestock operation is bankrolling both of those. We also have a team here, like we're doing added value work. So like next week, actually not next week, the week after, I'm shutting our butcher shop down for the week, and we'll paint the floors and stuff, but our butcher shop crew goes out to the field and we plant all the grafts that are callousing in the cooler. So there's a little bit of like labor allocation. um and I think of a farm team as an immune system, and the bigger farm team and operations able to support, like the bigger the farm's immune system is, we can like migrate that labor to an area needed. So doing these plantings, I don't think of agroforestry as something that's like gonna pay us at any point. I've never thought of it. At first I was like, is that true? Is that a thing? Like, what are the agronomics of agroforestry? But I came to realize I just don't think of it as one. I'm excited by like some fence posts, maybe some lumber down the road, but mostly it's like the priorities I mentioned before, like shade. um just some of the environmental benefits are huge, but I like, with everybody coming to this as a climate resilience measure in my group here, it's like thinking long term. Just it's not it's yeah thinking long term, it feels like it's a cycle we have to kick off. I know there are some signs here from previous generations of farmers, stuff that I inherited, that like they took good care of the barn or like the infrastructure they took good care of. But yeah, changes to the design of the ecological side of the farm. I don't know. I guess in other cultures where I see like small ag have being a little more solid and many generations in, it feels like there's a little more inheritance of this kind of design work. That was maybe a long answer to that question, but yeah, it feels like my operation, it's a little bit of a labor of love. It's annoying that, as you mentioned earlier, everyone can see the value of incorporating trees in these systems, but that it's not like gonna support us financially in my career, which is so we'll do what we can.
Do you think there's ever a point in time you could imagine maybe it doesn't produce a marketable yield, but it's providing something, especially to the livestock, I'm thinking that really saves something that is a loss or is really challenging to deal with.
Yeah, it seems like there are so many benefits. I don't think they're like benefits that are going to affect our cash flow. And again, to be specific, like we're not doing a chestnut plantation. I've seen like those models are so cool and I'm so excited to see them in 20 years when they're full tilt. But that's just not what we're doing at this point. So those operations seem like clearly there's like an ROI built in from the beginning. Um, yeah, but of course, like there are such good like there's like some um, medicinal benefits for the livestock grazing some of these fodder crops that I think are really meaningful and cool and important. And shade is like heat stress is very real. So if we're going to deal with more of it, we have to take it really seriously.
I love that. I just love the idea of the farm team as an immunoresponse and immune system. Like I think that's a really wonderful way to conceptualize that. I think on our I don't have much to add. I would just plus one everything that Courtney just said. I think that yeah, what was some things that came up in that group when we were talking about what is hard about this is just also the labor is hard, like it's hard to dig holes. It's hard, especially when you live in really rocky, terrain and it's hard to nurture the plants. Like when we used to try to do perennials here for various botanical projects, and we always just neglect them over the annuals, because it's a different system. So it's like hard to like build in a practice of maintenance when you're used to just annual production. So that's something that we're all struggling with. And yeah, just not letting them languish. But exactly when when you're always prioritizing, when you work with such tiny margins, if any margin, you have to prioritize what is keeping you afloat. So those are real issues, but um I think the biodiversity and all of the other benefits that come with it are we all think it's worth the effort. So we're trying. And we're really lucky on our farm. We have a new staff member that had experience at various, his focus is perennials and tree crop. So like he's really excited to be taking this on as his personal project. So that helps us that there's like a lot of interest right now on our team.
Yeah.
And to piggyback on that, I think that someone could have a position. I think that it could be made to be profitable for someone, or at least to be a contributor in that realm if there was like a manager for that system specifically. And I think what I'm speaking to is more like bringing it in for those priorities as a livestock farmer. Yeah, but I think it's like if we wanted to integrate fruit crops and someone wanted to like manage those fruit crops and manage the orchard, obviously those systems are productive tree crops, and I think we just don't have the capacity to manage productive tree crops here successfully. But I think that would be a cool model. Someone could come here and like an orchardist could have a tiny, a little.
Probably we may have lost you to the frozenness. We'll see of the digital freeze here, but hopefully you come back to us. I'm going to open it up to see if there's other questions. There's one in the Q&A, but I know Emily had a question she wanted to pop in with. So you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was thinking about what Steve was saying from the findings in the beginning about like how like emotional trees are, and especially as these sort of like thing like sort of like this everyone has like a memory associated with trees, or sort of like sort of like an inherited culture of how they perceive trees. And I'm hearing that neither of you are working in spaces where you've at least like physically inherited, like tree systems to work with. And I'm wondering if you could build out a legacy, like, a legacy of agroforestry in your space. Like, what would that look like? Would that be, and maybe that's even ideological, like just like valuing, different, multi-story growing types or something like that. But like, what would that look like if you could kind of choose your tree legacy or your agroforestry legacy in your spaces.
Do you want to go first, Courtney? No? Okay.
Doesn't have to be a final answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think
It's iterative.
all of the above is we're starting with nothing here. We're like this in general, the land that we're working with up here was deforested completely, for livestock, for sheep mostly. And then the forests that have grown back up are, kind of someone one of our farmers said they're shitty little forests. They're like just kind of not super biodiverse or healthy forests. So and then there's no orchards in our no not even any fruit in our zone. Of any kind, not even like blueberries or strawberries, very, very little over here. So we're starting from a very like, degraded dairy world. And I think just integrating any kind of tree culture here would be a big win. But specifically, I think that I'm really excited about the project of doing, because we are doing the aggregated, marketing and distribution here anyway, of doing some sort of aggregated production of tree crops that we can then process collectively and have as sort of a regional product. I think that would be so cool. That's for the next generation, but if we could set everybody up to win, that would be really fun. And then just for our own farm, I mean, I thought I was going to farm until my farm partner and I got tired, and then we would just close doors. And because we had no land security, we had a landlord that would never sell us the farm. So the fact that we now have our own spot and that the farm might even survive for a next generation of farmers is like super exciting. But if we could set them up with perennials or, fruit or berries or anything that might help them get a leg up when they start, that would be amazing. Like we just put in asparagus. I've been farming for 15 years and we were like, oh, we can finally put in asparagus because we'll be here next year, So we're at that level of insecurity. But so this is like a really it's a dream come true to be like thinking in a longer time period than quarterly or annually, So I think that that's like the exciting part of this is like the planning side, which is like being able to plan together as a region for a future that looks different than the one that we inherited.
That's lovely. Thank you.
The question's what our agroforestry legacy here might be, right? Yeah. I think, well, we have so many cute and fun ideas to implement. We're planting hedgerows. Both where it's really windy here. We're planting hedgerows, windbreaks. We are going to put in rows of shade trees. I mean, I have a tree nursery, so I'm also like banking genetics around the farm to propagate off of, which I'm excited about and excited for the future of those to just be here. So I try to be really good about mapping those. Mostly those things, I guess. The plantings that are sort of functional. And then I'm also, I think and Steve mentioned this, I think just having genetics that people can propagate off of the whole community. Being able to come and cut scion wood from like 50 varieties that we didn't used to have here is cool.
Thanks for indulging my question, Steve.
That's a good one. Just one question in the Q&A I'll read out. Appreciating the conversation around contrasting this project with other USDA funded work. Are there methods or approaches we've learned from these sessions and conversations we'd incorporate into other projects? Do you have ideas for ways to advocate for these approaches within other programs like Farm Bill or such and such, other things? It's funny, this reminds me of, I was recently reading some USDA agroforestry timeline that was put out. And one of the things that was mentioned there specifically was having listening sessions. So clearly it's on people's mind. I never, haven't seen those show up. I think the clear takeaway from this is like farmers are game and enthusiastic for that space if it can be provided. It's a question also of how that space is provided. We had a what our NRCS locally is supposed to have is a sort of, they don't call it a listening session. I'm trying to remember what they use for language, but some kind of feedback session. And there wasn't a lot of time for feedback. It was mostly we were told about the programs they had and how we could sign up. But there wasn't actually like facilitated space for dialogue. And I'm not sure. I have reasons to think of why, but like I think the takeaway is, and it's something I feel personally, is like the need to be trained more as facilitators, to think about how we create spaces around programs. I think often in my experience with a lot of ag service providers is it's very much like old school lecture, here's some information, and if we just give you knowledge, you'll be able to do it. And I think there's something much deeper needed. And I also think that intersects with what's just happening culturally right now. So I think that that is the starting point. You know, it always felt like, oh, it'd be nice if at the end of the program people could socialize. But I think like that element has to be actually the beginning and throughout and like centered. And that's what this enthusiasm and this interest was really notable. And I think we created a container, but I think the subject matter and the space to do that, and then that we're able to follow up and think about including folks along this whole process has been really like mutually beneficial. So I don't know how those things can show up because that sort of requires folks to like think of how they do programming differently and how they do projects differently. And like I say, I think building facilitation skills, building other skills other than just knowledge and sort of expertise is going to be really important. That's
Yeah,
on.
and I don't know who was asking that question, but I also love answering, like if an issue I care about giving feedback on comes across my desk, I would love to fill out a survey for something I actually cared about giving feedback on. So I wouldn't, like, if we can't gather in a physical space, I still would go for getting farmer feedback directly. Pay like an admin person to read our responses and chart them. There's like no one's ever asked for feedback on any FSA program I've ever participated in. And I asked the FSA recently, like, how that happens. And they were like, it's just farm bill. And then it's like the farm bill feels like this thing we can't actually access a meaningful conversation about. So I think asking even in surveys is great. And what you're saying about the NRCS, yeah, those meetings, like farmers will stop showing up. I will not show up to a second meeting where I was like had to sit through like a classroom presentation and there was no discussion. So I think that like farmers are subject to so much burnout around like poor strategy for gathering feedback. But I think gathering the feedback is super, super important. And um, yeah, it's just highly functional for good programming.
I don't have much to add. I think you guys covered it.
Yeah, cool. Great. Well, I really appreciate y'all's coming today. It's been a really rich conversation. I think it's also brought like some real life to the summary too, just to like be clear where we're coming from. And yeah, Jonathan and I both are just like thrilled to keep working with y'all and see this slow evolution happen, which is like sometimes I feel guilty that it's slow, but I keep realizing that it's like actually exactly at the right pace, and
We're all
that's really central to this. So yeah.
I think we need to have a mega hangout with all of the Essex farms and our Catskills farms once we get
Yeah. Meet in the middle. Meet in the middle.
Thank you for giving us the opportunity to chat.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, Steve. Your approach, approach to this project is really exciting. I hope it becomes more widely adapted.
Yeah. Thanks. We appreciate it. And come on all back next week. We'll have Jonathan McRae and some nursery folks, lovely folks as well, sharing about that aspect of the project, and we'll keep the dialogue going. So thanks for coming today, everybody.
Thanks so much, all. We'll see you on the next episode.